There are some fundamentals of this strange existence we call life, which simply aim at not exacerbating it, but on the contrary at making it more easy and agreeable, endurable and nice. The heart of these recommendations concern, of course, the strange phenomenon on such a universal bearing on us all that everything depends on it. Love is, of course, to everlastingly be cherished, cultivated, practiced, and disseminated, but with care and always kindly. It must not be enforced, for then the only consequence is backfire, which can lead to anything destructive. You shall hear our story, which is all about the consequence of love, for good, for worse, but never without consequences. 2. Thus spoke the fairest man that I had ever seen, all clad in white, with golden hair down to his waist, not even 20, but still with such a wisdom, as if he had been an old soul ever, with experience enough to teach all mankind how to make it better and get more aware and wiser. 3. He was a kind of rover of the sea, no roots ashore, although he was a doctor, shunning his own kind and living only for the aliens, innocents of wilderness, the undestroyed of nature, preferably of some romantic, pure environment of virgin beauty, ocean shores and mountains, like Tahiti and the Southeast Asian archipelago, but most of it had already been spoilt and ruined. There were still, however, some few archipelagos unknown to white men's greed, and one of them was only known to him. It was the 7 islands of Yagande, far away beyond all maps and charts of knowledge, and it was his habit once a year to go there, selling trinkets and some medicines for pearls and costly handicrafts and jewels, which he then would sell on the Calcutta market at some modest profit. Thus his only use of his monopoly was to preserve it, keep it virgin and unknown, and act as its protector, while he modestly enjoyed the local fame of being venerated as the only white man known at all to all the natives of Yagande. But one year he brought a fellow with him. 4. He was of some dark romantic hue, a sailor born and famous for his legendary seamanship, as he once as a youngster actually had managed quite alone to bring a ship without its captain through a storm. He was from Venice, but, like Dr. Magnus, kept roaming about around the world, with no safe haven to find peace and rest in. They had met at some bazaar in Bombay or Calcutta, and at that time Dr. Magnus needed some spare hands. The storms, typhoons and hurricanes around the Indian Ocean growing worse, so that he felt the need to play it safer, going out to remote islands beyond any chart without a single person knowing where he was. As you grow older, loneliness becomes an alien company, while instead the urge of sharing grows more imminent. Quite simply, Dr. Magnus asked his newfound mate, "Would there be any interest on your part to come along with me to unknown South Pacific isles, which no one in geography has ever heard of?" The Venetian sailor asked immediately, "That is exactly what I need. Do such islands still exist?" And he was on. 5. They reached the islands early after dawn one morning, and people gathered everywhere along the shores to greet them with a wondrous song of welcome, which they sang in parts, in clear and stupefying harmony, preparing garlands to receive the yearly visitor. But the activity and eagerness along the shores, among the steadily increasing groups of curious people, were enhanced when it was noticed that their loved friend the doctor this year had brought with him a companion who looked interesting indeed. 6. As they were fetched ashore by outriggers, the king himself embarking on his sumptuous royal boat to offer them a very special welcome, as they almost were submerged in garish garlands, they were lifted upon shoulders of the natives on the shore, to then be promptly carried to the king's house for a most pacific banquet, while the singing and the celebrating went on enthusiastically. After all, the best friend of the natives paid them annually one visit only, and since now they were 2 persons, that must needs have double celebrations. 7. As they sat down to their royal banquet in the king's house, there was no end to the affluence of the most exquisite, delicious cooking of the South Seas. Present at the presentation of the king's whole family, with wives and sons and other relatives, whose status and relationships were out of definition, there was also the king's one and only daughter, a fair maid of perfect and exotic beauty, in her best age and not yet in full bloom. As the sailor's eyes discovered her, she went under his skin immediately and stayed there, and he could not concentrate on any matter else all through the overwhelming dinner. Dr. Magnus saw that something dangerous had happened and gave him a friendly warning. Mind you, as the only daughter of the king, she is everything to him, and he will never part with her. There have been suitors, lots of them, but no one will get through without some testing. If the test is failed, the suitor's life is lost. Appalled, but not deterred, the sailor asked, "Have many suitors thus been executed?" "They cannot be counted," was the sombre answer. 8. Naturally, the more the sailor's interest grew in that most fascinatingly attractive princess, with her dark brown, olive-reddish hair in most intoxicating generosity and richness, flowing far beneath her bottom, especially as she did not remain for dinner, but departed suddenly as soon as she had seen him. That could only mean one thing, and he was well aware of it. 9. He had no interest, therefore, in remaining bored and stuffed by far too many dishes at the royal table, but as soon as it was possible for him to break and move out from the culinary slavery, he made polite excuses, indicating natural demands, and went out for a vital breath of fresher air. He instantly made out his bearings and soon found himself a total stranger in the middle of a capital but alien village, but was nonetheless led by a higher instinct to pursue a very special course, like by a higher scent and sense, and suddenly stopped short at a most touching scene. There she was, the royal princess, in a very humble cottage, helping a sick family in need, where obviously the mother lying on a bed was dying. The dark sailor, with his most romantic aspects of a wild and dashing stranger from beyond the seas, knew perfectly how to control himself, and therefore did not interfere with anything, but stood apart in reverence and kept his silence, absolutely still, while the young princess worked and did her best to soothe the dying mother's pains and ease the waning moments of her life, while her 2 children, crying silently, kept equally perfectly still in mute despair. The moment came when the afflicted patient breathed her last. The princess had to finally give up, and tenderly embraced the orphaned children, giving them the comfort of her sharing with them all their tears. She then looked up at the observant and respectful sailor, as if she had known him all her life, and gave him unmistakably a sign for him to help her cleaning up and managing the ruined household. He did never hesitate, but did his best, and so they worked together, comforting the children, talking with the relatives, preparing for the funeral and obsequies, until she could breathe out as she had done her work. She rose. The children were now taken care of by the relatives. She moved towards the entrance, where the stranger stood quite still, as he had done the whole time, as if in devotion, gave him but one glance, and ran for it. She ran away like an escaping deer, and he took up the hunt. That glance had told him far too much not to be challenged. 10. She ran like a stag, and she was a good runner. So for all his excellent condition, he had to put some effort into it, while she remained far ahead of him, and he could but keep pace with her. She ran all the way out of the village, and did not at all seem tired of it, as she finally made suddenly a halt and turned around to meet her lover, laughing heartily for a most natural welcome. He could not believe his eyes. There she was, the fairest princess in this world, waiting for him well outside the village, in perfect safety and complete intimacy, with a most warm, welcoming, laughing welcome. Checked, he hesitated for a moment, but for just a fragment of a moment, before he accepted her opening to him and made the final and irrevocable advance. 11. When they both were tired out and rested in the shadows of the hiding palms, she gently stroked his rich, dark, longish hair that matched her own most perfectly, in shades of darkness with some dark blonde streaks, as his was growing also, as all hairs will ever do, although not as far beneath his shoulders as did hers, and hold him intimately warm with tenderness. My father will cut off your head for this. He read her thoughts and got her warning message, as the worried tender eyes were not to be mistaken. And he thought, I would not have loved you for less. They rested still, remaining in each other's arms and harmony, enjoying the relaxing peace and quiet after the exertion, while they mixed each other's hairs as a silent promise never to let them unmix again, while he delighted in completely burying himself in hers, unwilling ever to get out of her again. At last she rose, as she felt ready, and he knew the moment was at hand of truth and confrontation. 12. They walked together through the village, hand in hand, as natural as any lovers, while the villagers who saw them did not mind at all, but took them as they were, accepting them completely without reservations, noticing at once that they were natural as lovers, and a most becoming pair at that. They hardly could have matched each other better. One or other aged villager perhaps looked down with some foreboding afterthought, like, I sincerely hope this suitor finer will be the one, too well aware of the ordeal that was awaiting him. Canto 3, 1. My love, I do not fear your father, although he be king and might cut off my head, but I am sure he can't do that for love, and my sincerest love for you is of a greater power than of any king." She did not understand him, but the meaning, and took firmly hold of her protector's hand and led him without hesitating promptly to her father's home and royal hall. 2. "I know it all already," said the king, not in the least nonplussed by the young couple's boldness. He had seen too many suitors to his daughter in his life, and seen them all end up as failures. "Leave us, daughter. Your new suitor and myself will have a chat together, since he needs to be informed of what awaits him." She had been through this procedure several times before, so she did not object, just press her lover's hand a little as a small but definite encouragement, and left. 3. "My honoured guest, you know, of course, the consequences of your importunity." "I love her, that is all," the sailor said, "and I am willing to accept the whole responsibility." "You don't have to. You may still be free, and leave our islands never to come back a living man." "I would prefer to stay here as a living man and as your son-in-law." "So you insist, my friend. I pity you, for no one has proved worthy of my daughter, nor will no one ever do so, since it is impossible." "How so?" "So you are willing to go through the trial, even well aware that it may cost your life?" "Of course, or else I would not love her. Love alone will prove me worthy of her." "I pity you the more, but since you are the friend of my best friend, the doctor, and he brought you here himself, I shall make an exception for you. If you fail, which you will naturally do like all the others, I will let you leave our islands with my doctor without execution, on condition that you never will return." "I will not fail." "Not even with the utterly impossible?" "Just try me, noble king, and I will risk whatever." 4. Not even to himself the king could quite deny that he was just a little bit impressed by this romantic stranger's stalwart courage, and he wondered at his lack of hesitation, and did almost think, "How sad that he will not become my son-in-law." Instead he said, "All right, you take it on yourself. Just face the consequences then. The trial is as follows. You shall prove your love by accomplishing a ring that proves love's sovereignty over any power. You shall make that ring of gold, but out of nothing. And with that ring on my finger, I shall manage to have any wish that I might come to think of realized." "A ring of gold to manifest whatever you may wish?" "Precisely. Don't say it is possible. You are still free to pull out." "And is that all?" "What do you mean?" "The ring. Of course that's all. What could there more be to it? Of all wishes, that's the most impossible to ever have accomplished." "Let me try at least." "Of course you may. That's why I have presented you with the ordeal, for you to have a try." 5. The sailor left the king's house deep in thought, while the presumptuous king again just could not help considering it would have been a splendid son-in-law in spite of all. The sailor walked out of the village down to the lagoon with lingering and thoughtful steps as the Pacific afternoon soon started glowing before sunset, turning everything to gold and rosy red. He found the beach, and beyond it a lonely rock, which matched his own predicament and loneliness completely. Wherefore he made his position there, and simply went into the deepest meditation as the evening turned the universe to red, to quietly fade out like dying embers for the metamorphosis into night. When all the stars were kindled, lo, there also rose the moon to join them all, and by coincidence it happened to be full. So there the man sat lonely and immovable in meditation like a statue, while the moon transcended gloriously all brightness of the shining stars, and triumphed through the night, like really trying to inspire the unanswering man, who did not seem to pay the least attention to the magic efforts of the moon, who started to decline as morning gradually was to be introduced. But then, just as the moon was lowering in herself to sink into the ocean with the brightness of the night, the man just raised his hand with thumb and index, like to catch the last ray of the moon, and thereby shape something into the air. And there it was, a golden ring that hung like in a spider's thread, so delicately in the last ray of the moon. And as that last ray finally was spent, the morning rising and the moon resigning finally, the man picked down the ring from that last ray and held it in his hand, as if it could not be more obvious that a golden ring had been accomplished in that fashion. And then, as the sun presented her first morning beams, the man at last rose from his meditation with a ring committed in his hand, and started confidently to return back to the village, to reality, to humankind, and to his love. 6. The king could also find no sleep this night, since all that he could think of was that blessed would-be son-in-law, whose failure would turn his daughter once again most miserable, as if there had not been enough before of failed suitors. In his sweat he rose quite early in the morning in despair, and thought, maybe for once I just should cancel my presumptions, and let love, my daughter, and her suitor have their way without objections. In that very moment the young sailor entered through his door and met the king without a word. The king looked questioningly at him. Still without a word, the sailor left the ring delivered safely in the king's own hand, and all the king could do was just to look perplexed and watch the sailor leave for other business, namely, to at last, now after a long night's hard work, go to his love and tenderly take care of her. 7. The king looked at the ring and wondered at its marvel. Maybe he just had it in his luggage, like a present from the doctor's own considerable store. It therefore simply had to be a fake. To prove that fact, the king decided to express a wish, but found it hard to wish for anything, since he had everything. But then he had a bright idea. The one thing he had lacked in life was a good singing voice, so that's what he decided on to wish. He laughed at the idea. Of course it was impossible that he now, after croaking all his life, should have a voice of quality, but then his laughter struck him as melodious. It was musical. He could sing. The ring had worked. It actually had been accomplished. 8. There was naturally then a splendid wedding, while the doctor still was present at Yagande, while the happy couple were content to ever remain there at their Pacific paradise, by the white beaches on the coral shores, with only beauty all around them in the people and in nature, and from all the sea with blue and purple golden sunsets every day, with music singing them to sleep each night by magic whisperings from ever-rolling waves. As Dr. Magnus left without his steward, music also followed his departure, as the people in 3 voices sang their praise and thanks to him that he had delivered to them such a perfect lover for the perfect beauty of their princess. Canto 4, 1. The king, however, felt misgivings at the power of the ring and was afraid that it might one day be abused. He never dared again to wish for anything, since that one wish had so astounded him by coming true. To make it certain, to exclude all possible abuse, he went out to the far point of his island, where the river mouthed into the sea, and there he flung the ring into the current, hoping it would bring it out into the ocean, there to bury it forever. But, however, there was one small fish that saw the golden object glimmer in the water, and just not to let it go, he simply caught it in his mouth and wondered what to do with it. I know, he thought, I shall deliver it at present to the fairest of all mermaids, to the Ocean King's own daughter. I shall give it as a humble token of my even humbler adoration. 2. But it was no easy quest our little fish had found to his commitment, for the sea was vast, encompassing the entire globe, and the sweet mermaid lived in its profoundest depths, far from the ordinary streams and currents, but our fish knew how to seek her out. There was a special natural phenomenon deep down in the remotest South Atlantic, where the storms make traffic sparse and where the billows are notorious for their devastating size, a whirlpool coming from the bottom of the sea as the unique accessibility and entrance to the Sea King's dwelling place, where also our fairest mermaid had her premises. Our fish sought out the outskirts of the whirlpool and allowed himself to follow and get caught therein, and so he soon was on his way down to the bottom of the sea, where the lights increase the further down you get, the whirlpool being constantly illuminated by the brightest plankton and the smallest living beings carrying their own light. 3. Thus gradually the fish was willingly dragged down into the slowly brightening profoundest abyss of the South Atlantic, where the Sea King had his palace. He had visited the mermaid princess once before, so he knew well his ways into the royal virgin chamber, where the princess at the moment was quite busy combing out her long and flowing greenish silken hair. "My fish, you have returned," she cried for joy, as she immediately did recognize the small but friendly fish. "My princess, yes, and with a mission, for I have a present for you." And the fish delivered what he so by chance had found. She took it up and marvelled at its perfect rounded form. There never was a circle made so perfect as this ring, and she did greatly wonder as to how it had been made, and could not guess, of course, that it had once been shaped from the last ray of a full moon at morning at its very fullest. 4. She could not in any other way show her enormous gratitude than by indulging in a kiss between the eyes of the small fish, which made him blush considerably. Never had he been so overwhelmed by such a royal grace. He swam away, beatified, while she had put the ring upon her finger and resumed her combing. But of course, like combs so often do, it suddenly got stuck in that rich hair of hers, and she lost all her patience. "Useless comb, I wish I had one that would never more get stuck." And suddenly there was another comb beside her. Where did that come from, she thought, and used it, and it pleased her greatly by not getting stuck at all, which made her wonder even more. 5. As the days passed, she now and then again was taken by surprise by the alarming fact that her small petty wishes suddenly came true, and she began to think about how this phenomenon had started. She remembered well the visit of a small admirer, the fish, and tried for luck the innocent experiment of daring to express a wish without the ring upon her finger. Nothing happened. She again tried that experiment without and with the ring alternately, and thus empirically she found out the secret of the ring. "This goes beyond me and my limited capacity," she thought, and went with this new worrying problem to her father. She explained it all to him. He shook his head and couldn't quite believe it, but she proved the fact to him, which turned him serious. 6. "My daughter," finally the Sea King said, "this gift from out of nowhere, from a small red herring, offers us a terrible responsibility, and we shall have no choice but to apply it well." She nodded, since her train of thoughts had been the same. "You know that all our oceans, with all wildlife, seriously are threatened by the recklessness of man. Our entire world is being poisoned and polluted by his ignorance and self-indulgent carelessness, as if he was alone and easily could do alone without all nature and without all other forms of life, forgetting that he is dependent on the ecosystems and that they will work and flow without disturbance, keeping naturally the whole planet clean, while he alone keeps ruining it with dirt and rubbish. Several of our rarest species have already been exterminated by his carelessness and egoistic folly. Let us do something about it, since we here now have the means." 7. She instantly caught on and was completely with him. Thus they went together for the strangest quest, abandoning the safety of their royal palace at the bottom of the South Atlantic to embark upon a journey that would last for all their lives, preserving natural resources everywhere, restoring paradises, saving species and creating safe environments, protection areas and wildlife havens, inaccessible to man, the all-invading monster, for the preservation and protection of all kinds of life. 8. The very last thing that they created was this forest, where they left the ring right at the heart of it, where these two brooks together join to form a junction and a little island by it at the bottom of a tiny whirlpool, where it has been lying undisturbed and unused all since then, but still its power secretly, invisibly pervades the entire forest, the effect of which is that impurity cannot exist here. Everyone who enters is completely purified in soul and body in a natural etheric process which no one can fail to be affected by, most positively, which of course you felt yourself. 9. When thus they had accomplished their life's work, the saving of the planet and all wildlife with all nature, they gave up their earthly sea life and were taken up to join the spirits of the air in which community they still are active, even more invisibly and even more inspiringly constructively than when they worked concretely, physically present here on earth among us. But we shall not know for certain how they go on working spiritually until we one day, perhaps, will join them. Thus completed Gabriel his story. Canto 5.